The crowd stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the billionaire's son clinging desperately to the slippery edge of the open sewer. His cries for help echoed in the narrow street, but no one moved. They all thought the same thing. His father has everything, why should I risk my life? People whispered excuses. Too dangerous, too dirty, not their problem. The boy's small hands began to slip. For a moment, it felt like everyone had silently agreed to let him fall. Then, out of the crowd, a thin little girl in tattered clothes stepped forward. She was the daughter of a street vendor, someone barely noticed by the rich or powerful. Without hesitation, she kicked off her sandals and jumped straight into the filthy water. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. They had expected the wealthy, the strong, or at least a policeman to act, but not this fragile child. With surprising strength, she pushed and guided the struggling boy toward the edge. A man finally bent down, pulling both children out, soaked and shivering. The boy clung to the girl, sobbing. His father, who arrived minutes later in a sleek car, didn't know what to say. For once, his money had been powerless. That evening, news channels called her a hero. But when asked why she jumped, the little girl simply said, "Because he was drowning, and no one else would." Sometimes, the smallest heart holds the greatest courage. The street was crowded yet silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the billionaire's son, dangling helplessly inside the sewer. His expensive shoes were gone, his hands slippery with grime, his terrified screams piercing through the air. But no one stepped forward. Some muttered that it was too dangerous. Others shrugged, thinking the boy's father had more than enough money to hire people for such risks. A few even whispered cruelly, "Why should we save him? His family never cared about us." Seconds ticked away. The boy's grip weakened. And then, unexpectedly, a tiny figure broke the spell of indifference. A poor little girl, barefoot, her dress patched in places, ran to the edge. Her mother sold vegetables on the corner, and she had grown up knowing hunger, struggle, and invisibility. Yet she didn't hesitate. Before anyone could stop her, she leapt into the filthy sewer. The stench was unbearable, the current stronger than it looked. But she fought her way toward the boy, speaking softly to calm him. With determination far bigger than her size, she pushed him upward, giving him the strength to reach the surface. A man in the crowd finally reached down, pulling both children out. The boy collapsed into tears, clinging to his unlikely rescuer. The people who had stood frozen moments earlier now looked down in shame. When his powerful father arrived, his eyes filled with something money could never buy, gratitude mixed with humility. He offered the girl anything she wanted. But she shook her head and whispered, "I just didn't want him to die." The crowd fell silent again, this time not from fear, but from awe. True wealth is not measured in gold, it lives in the courage of a heart willing to act when no one else will. The billionaire's son was screaming, his voice echoing from the sewer drain where he clung to a rusted pipe. His designer shirt was soaked, his face pale with fear. A crowd had gathered, businessmen, shopkeepers, passers-by, but no one stepped forward. "He'll be fine," someone muttered. "His father can afford the hospital bill." Another shrugged. A few even laughed nervously, unwilling to risk themselves in the filth. But the truth was simple. Everyone was waiting for someone else to act. The boy's hands began to tremble. He was seconds from slipping under when a soft voice broke through the silence. "I'll help him." The crowd turned. A little girl, no older than 9, stepped out. She wore a faded dress, her hair tied in a messy braid. Everyone knew her. She was the daughter of a poor fruit seller who worked nearby. Before a single adult could react, she climbed down into the sewer. The water was foul, swirling with garbage, but she didn't flinch. Reaching the boy, she wrapped her tiny arms around him and shouted, "Hold on to me!" With every ounce of strength, she guided him toward the ledge. Finally, a man leaned down and pulled them both out. The boy collapsed on the ground, shivering and sobbing. His rescuer, dripping wet, just smiled. When the billionaire himself arrived, pushing past the crowd, he froze at the sight of his son hugging the poor girl who had saved him. His eyes softened, and his voice cracked when he whispered, "Thank you?" The crowd looked down, ashamed. They had money, strength, and status, but only a child with nothing had found the courage to act. That day, the richest person on the street was the poorest girl of all. The billionaire's son was trapped in the sewer, clinging desperately to the slimy wall. His screams for help were raw, desperate, and heartbreaking. Yet the crowd around him stood frozen. People covered their noses from the stench, shaking their heads. "Too dangerous. Someone else will do it. It's not worth the risk." No one moved. The boy's grip was slipping, his cries weaker. Just when it seemed all hope was gone, a small figure darted forward. She was a poor little girl, barefoot, her dress worn thin. She had no riches, no status, but she had something no one else had that day: courage. Without hesitation, she climbed into the filthy water. Gasps filled the air as she fought her way toward the drowning boy. The current pulled, the stench burned her lungs, but she refused to give up. Wrapping her arms around him, she whispered, "I've got you." Together, they struggled toward the ledge. At last, a man reached down and pulled them both to safety. The crowd erupted in cheers, but fell silent when a sleek black car screeched to a stop. The billionaire himself rushed out, panic written all over his face. He dropped to his knees, clutching his son. Then his eyes fell on the trembling girl, shivering, soaked in filth. In that moment, all the walls of pride and power crumbled. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "You saved what all my money couldn't." He offered her gifts, money, anything she wanted. But the little girl only shook her head. "I didn't want him to die," she said softly. The billionaire pulled her close, realizing that day the richest gift in life is humanity itself. The billionaire's son dangled helplessly inside the sewer, his screams echoing off the walls. The crowd gathered, but nobody moved closer. "He's too far down. It's dangerous. His father has millions, let him figure it out." Excuses piled up as quickly as the boy's strength faded. His small fingers were slipping, his face pale with terror. Then, before anyone could process what was happening, a little girl from the crowd stepped forward. Her clothes were worn, her feet bare, but her eyes shone with determination. She was the daughter of a struggling street vendor, someone society rarely noticed. Without a word, she jumped in. The filthy water splashed high, and for a moment, the crowd gasped in shock. But she didn't stop. Fighting the current, gagging at the stench, she reached the boy and wrapped her arm around him. "Don't let go," she whispered. With everything inside her, she pushed him upward. Finally, a man from the crowd bent down, hauling both children out. The boy collapsed on the pavement, coughing, clinging to the girl as though she was the only solid thing in the world. When his father arrived minutes later, he rushed past his bodyguards and fell to his knees. Relief turned to awe when he saw who had saved his son, a poor little girl, trembling, yet smiling softly. The billionaire's voice cracked. "You've given me back my son. Tell me, what do you want?" "Anything." The girl shook her head. "I just didn't want him to die." For the first time in years, the man's eyes filled with tears. The next morning, headlines read, "Billionaire promises new foundation in honor of girl who saved his son." One act of courage had not only saved a life, but changed many.